Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we really try to pull out the key insights from a whole stack of sources just for you. Today we're diving into something, well, pretty fundamental to being human: language.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. How effortlessly do you just put words together, understand sentences you've never even heard before, create totally new stuff every day?
Yeah.
Is this just, learning by listening and repeating? Or is there something much deeper, maybe even innate, guiding us?
That really is the big question, isn't it? And when you talk about the sort of invisible architecture of language, you absolutely have to talk about Noam Chomsky. People often call him the father of modern linguistics. His ideas were, well, revolutionary. They completely flipped the script on older views. He proposed that language isn't just imitation, it's like deeply woven into our biology.
Yeah, total game changer. So for this deep dive, our mission is to unpack Chomsky's really groundbreaking ideas, primarily universal grammar, and then his later minimalist program. We'll explore how these theories help explain, how we pick up language so fast and maybe how it evolved. But we won't stop there. We'll also look at some contrasting perspectives, thinkers like Roland Barthes and Tom Leonard. They focus more on language as a social thing, even an ideological tool. And finally, we'll get into the ongoing debates, the criticisms, all the stuff that keeps these influential theories alive and kicking. Okay, let's unpack this initial kind of radical idea from Chomsky. The notion that we're actually born with a fundamental capacity for language already wired in, almost like it's waiting to be switched on.
It really is a transformative concept. Chomsky proposed that, yeah, beneath all the surface differences between languages, English, Japanese, Swahili, whatever, there's a shared foundation, common underlying principles and structures. He called this universal grammar, or UG. You can sort of picture it as a common blueprint or maybe a limited set of options for how any human language can be built. It's not conscious, but it's there.
Okay, a blueprint, but how does that blueprint actually get used?
Right. So to explain how this blueprint gets activated, he proposed the language acquisition device, or LAD. It's a hypothetical thing, a cognitive mechanism, part of our innate capacity. Think of it maybe like this. If universal grammar is the preloaded operating system in your brain for language, the LAD is the processor, the part that takes the language you hear around you, the input, and uses the UG rules to make sense of it. And that's why kids acquire language so incredibly fast and consistently. It's almost like an instinct.
That speed is incredible, especially learning complex rules, even when, the language kids hear isn't always perfect. Parents make mistakes, sentences get interrupted.
Exactly.
So that brings us to this poverty of the stimulus's idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
What did that argument actually tell us?
The poverty of the stimulus. It's really, really central to his whole argument. It basically highlights this key observation. Children learn incredibly complex language structures, even though the input they get is often limited, messy, full of errors. It's far from a perfect set of lessons.
So they're not just copying.
No, not at all. They deduce these deep, abstract rules, and then they use those rules to create completely novel sentences, things they've definitely never heard before. Think about how kids learn to ask yes-no questions in English. A simple rule might be swap the first two words, but they don't do that.
Right.
They quickly grasp complex hierarchical rules. They somehow know that in a sentence like, the boy who is happy is running, you don't move the first is. You move the main verb is to the front, is the boy who is happy running. That shows this innate grasp of structure, not just word order.
Wow.
So UG provides these universal principles, but languages still differ, right? That's where parameters come in. Children essentially set these parameters, like switches, based on the language they hear. Like, is the verb typically before the object, like English, subject, verb, object, or after it, like Japanese, subject, object, verb? The blueprint's universal, but the specific settings are learned.
Okay, that makes sense. So Chomsky had these powerful initial ideas, but then he refined them, right?
Yeah.
Trying to find an even simpler, more elegant explanation with this minimalist program. Sounds like stripping it down to the bare essentials.
Exactly. The Minimalist Program, which he developed from the early 90s onwards, was this really ambitious attempt to, well, simplify everything. To ask, what's the absolute minimum computational machinery we need to generate human language? It's kind of like theoretical physics, looking for the most elegant underlying laws. He proposed something called the strong minimalist thesis, the idea that UG basically reduces to the simplest, most efficient computational principles imaginable. Optimal design, you could say.
So what are these core operations, the absolute building blocks that create sentences in this minimalist view?
Well, at the heart of it are really just a few core operations. The most fundamental one is called merge. It's super simple, conceptually. It just takes two syntactic objects, say the word drink, and the word water and combines them into a new, larger object, the phrase drink water. But the really clever part is that merge can apply to its own output. It's recursive.
Meaning you can just keep combining things.
Exactly. You can take drink water and merge it with the to get the drink water, although that doesn't quite work in English, but you get the idea. You combine the and water to get the water, then merge that with drink to get drink the water. This recursive process allows for potentially infinite sentences from finite means. It explains how even toddlers get to that two-word stage, like see, shoe, combining things consistent with their language's patterns.
Okay, so merge builds things up. What about moving things around, like in questions?
Right, that's where move comes in. Chomsky later defined move as basically internal merge. You're taking something that's already been merged into the structure and you re-emerge it higher up, like moving who to the start of who did you see.
Ah.
And then there's agree. Think of it as the grammar checker. It ensures different parts of the sentence match up correctly. Like in English, we say she walks, not she walk. The verb ending agrees with the subject. Agree handles that kind of feature matching.
So it sounds like language isn't built all at once, but maybe in chunks or stages.
Yes, precisely.
Yeah.
That's the idea behind phases. Chomsky proposed that sentences are built up derivationally in these discrete chunks, these phases. A verb phrase, VP, expressing the core action and its participants might be one phase. A full clause, CP, with tense and force information might be another. And there's a key constraint called the phase impenetrability condition, or PIC.
Phase impenetrability. Sounds complicated.
It sort of is, but the basic idea is that once a phase is completed, its internal workings become sort of sealed off, inaccessible to later operations. If something needs to move out of that phase, it generally has to first move to the edge of the phase, like a little escape hatch.
Can you give us an example? How do we actually see evidence of these phases and this edge movement?
Yeah, absolutely. Think again about asking, who did you see? The word who starts out conceptually after see. Chomsky argues it doesn't just leap to the front. It moves step by step, likely stopping off at the edge of the verb phrase phase before moving higher. And there's actually really cool evidence for this kind of step-by-step movement in some languages. Take Madumba, spoken in Cameroon. In Madumba, when a question word like who moves, it leaves a specific tonal mark, like a high-low tone melody on the verb or tense marker at the edge of each phase it passes through. If that tonal footprint isn't there, the sentence is just wrong. It's ungrammatical. It's like seeing the linguistic tracks, the breadcrumbs left behind by this movement through phase edges. It strongly suggests these phases are real computational units.
That's fascinating. Okay, connecting this computational view back to the bigger picture, evolution. It sounds like Chomsky sees language not just as computation, but as a unique biological property of humans.
That's exactly right. This is part of the biolinguistic program. It views language as a fundamental biological endowment, a true species property unique to Homo sapiens, and remarkably uniform across all human populations, suggesting the core faculty hasn't changed much since early humans spread out. This implies it emerged relatively quickly in evolutionary time, perhaps even as a single significant change, and that its design is, in some sense, near optimal.
And a key piece of evidence for this innate biological basis is this idea of structure dependence.
Yes, structure dependence is considered a cornerstone universal property. It means that language rules always operate on the hierarchical structure of a sentence, and they completely ignore the simple linear order of words.
It still sounds a bit weird. Our brains usually like simple things, right? Why ignore the easy linear order for complex structure? Can you give another example?
Sure. Take a slightly ambiguous sentence like, birds that fly instinctively swim. Does instinctively describe how they fly or how they swim? It could be either, based on linear proximity. But now move the adverb. Instinctively, birds that fly swim. Now there's no ambiguity. Instinctively only modifies swim, even though fly is closer in the linear string of words. The rule for interpreting the adverb pays attention to the underlying grammatical structure, not just which word came before it. And the amazing thing is, kids get this by age 3. With no instruction. They don't make errors based on linear order. Studies even show that if you invent artificial languages, the ones that follow structure dependence activate the brain's language areas normally, while ones based on simpler linear rules don't. It seems deeply wired in.
Wow. Okay, so structure is key. But Chomsky also had some pretty radical ideas about meaning itself, didn't he? Something about words not just pointing to things in the world.
Yes, he critiques what he calls the representationalist doctrine. The common sense view that words are just labels for things out there, for extramental entities.
Wait, so words like river or tree aren't just pointing to a river or a tree. That's quite a thought.
It really is. It forces you to rethink the basics. Consider the old philosophical puzzle about the river from Heraclitus.
Uh,
Can you step in the same river twice? What makes it the same river when the water is constantly changing? Or, say, if it gets heavily polluted, 95% arsenic, it's still called a river, right?
yeah, I suppose so.
But if you line its banks with concrete and start running oil tankers down it, suddenly it's a canal, not a river. Or if it freezes solid, hardens, and they paint lines on it for cars, it becomes a highway. These examples show that our concept of river, or tree, or even person isn't just a direct reflection of something external. It depends heavily on our intentions, our perspectives, our mental acts and constructions. And we acquire these complex, nuanced concepts with surprisingly little direct evidence or experience. This strongly suggests that much of the richness of meaning is actually innate. How we got these concepts evolutionarily is still a huge mystery.
Okay, so Chomsky gives us this incredible picture of language as this innate, biological, computationally elegant system inside our heads, almost like a hidden operating system. But what about language out in the world? As a social force, maybe a tool for power or even, a weapon. This raises a really important question. How do other thinkers look at the rules and structures of language, especially how they shape culture and beliefs? Maybe in ways Chomsky's internal focus doesn't quite capture.
That's a crucial shift in perspective, absolutely. And it brings us to thinkers like Roland Barthes and the poet Tom Leonard. You could say their shared project, in a way, was to demystify language and the signs we see everywhere in popular culture, to sort of pull back the curtain on the underlying ideological power structures. So while Chomsky looks inward at the mind's architecture, Barthes and Leonard look outward at how language functions in society.
Let's start with Barthes. How did he approach this idea of language shaping culture?
Barthes was a French post-structuralist thinker, very influential. He looked really broadly at cultural stuff, magazines, ads, fashion, food, even professional wrestling. His main tool was semiology, the study of signs, and he famously analyzed what he called myth. For Barthes, myth isn't ancient stories. It's like a second layer of meaning that gets attached to everyday signs. An ordinary sign, like a photo, takes on this extra, usually ideological meaning.
Can you give an example of this myth?
Yeah, one of his most famous examples is analyzing a magazine cover showing a young black soldier saluting the French flag. On the surface, the sign is simple: military duty, patriotism. But Barthes argued this image functions as a myth. It communicates a deeper ideological message about French imperialism, the idea of a unified empire, assimilation, making these potentially controversial political ideas seem completely natural, just common sense, self-evident. His goal was to uncover how these cultural myths, often serving bourgeois interests, work to make ideology invisible.
Okay, so exposing hidden meanings in culture. What about Tom Leonard? How did he engage with language and power?
Tom Leonard, a Scottish poet from Glasgow, had a much sharper, more specific focus: the politics of language itself, especially working-class Glaswegian speech versus standard English. His method was his poetry. He often used phonetic spellings to represent how Glaswegian dialect actually sounds, deliberately challenging the hierarchies that deem proper English, the Queen's English, as superior or more intelligent.
How did he do that in his poems?
Yeah. A really powerful example is his poem, The 6 O'Clock News. He writes it as if the BBC newsreader is speaking in a thick Glaswegian dialect using phonetic spelling like "Halava harte."
Right.
By doing this, he just brilliantly exposes the prejudice, the judgment that's automatically applied to non-standard speech. Leonard's work really highlights the absurdity of judging someone's intelligence or credibility based on whether they use high-status or low-status language. So both Barthes and Leonard, in their own ways, were critiquing these dominant cultural institutions, the sort of bourgeois cultural norms for Barthes, the educational and media establishment for Leonard that police language and decide what's correct or valid. Leonard even directly referenced Barthes, so there's a clear link in their thinking about language and power.
Right, and any theory as big and influential as Chomsky's, especially claiming universality, is bound to stir up a lot of debate and criticism. Let's dig into some of those challenges.
Oh, absolutely. And the debates are ongoing and vigorous. One major line of criticism concerns the definition of universal grammar itself. Critics argue that its definition can seem a bit, vague or slippery, that it gets applied inconsistently across different studies or arguments, making it really hard to pin down and test empirically, let alone refute. If the goalposts keep shifting, How do you challenge it?
Okay, so definitional issues. What about the evidence itself, like the poverty of the stimulus?
That's another big area. There are significant empirical challenges to it. Some linguists and psychologists argue that the language input children actually get is much richer and more structured than Chomsky originally assumed. They point to large databases of child-directed speech, like Child is, and suggest maybe children are using powerful statistical learning mechanisms.
Huh?
Picking up on complex patterns, probabilities of word co-occurrence without needing pre-programmed grammatical rules, or maybe using similarity-based generalization, learning from analogous structures.
That makes you wonder. With all the buzz around AI these days, you hear people asking if things like ChatGPT kind of prove that you can get complex grammar just from massive amounts of input without needing innate rules. It's a tempting thought.
It is a tempting thought, and it comes up a lot, but it's really complex. We have to be careful comparing AI models to human brains. AI models learn very differently. They need vastly more data, and importantly, they can be trained on grammatically incorrect or even impossible language structures and still function, whereas human brains seem specifically turned for human language structures. So it's not quite a slam dunk against innate factors.
Okay, fair point. What other criticisms are there?
Well, there's the question of universality itself. Some linguists, particularly those working on a wide range of diverse, less studied languages, question how universal Chomsky's proposed structures really are. They point to the sheer bewildering variety of languages and argue that truly exceptionless universals might be quite rare. Many proposed universals might be strong tendencies rather than absolute rules.
Which leads to questions about scientific rigor.
Exactly. Concerns about unfalsifiability. Critics sometimes suggest that UG theories can sometimes feel more like post hoc observations, descriptions that fit known languages, rather than making clear, testable predictions that could potentially be proven wrong. There's also been criticism about a potential historical bias towards well-studied languages like English and SVO language, and perhaps an over-reliance on linguists' own intuitions about grammaticality rather than broad, unbiased experimental data from diverse language speakers.
In the evolutionary story, the idea of merge appearing suddenly.
Yes, the evolutionary plausibility is definitely debated. The idea that something as fundamental as merge just popped into existence via a single random mutation, a stochastic event, well, it irks some researchers, partly because language itself changes culturally much faster than genes evolve. So if UG is hardwired genetically, it seems like a moving target for evolution to hit and maintain. The exact evolutionary pathway remains highly speculative.
And finally, the balance between nature and nurture.
Right. There's always the debate about the focus on innate versus environment. Critics argue the Chomskyan framework might overemphasize the innate blueprint and, as a result, underestimate the crucial roles played by the learning environment, social interaction, imitation, and general cognitive abilities that develop alongside language. It's about finding the right balance.
So after this whole journey, what does it all mean for how we understand language? We've gone from Chomsky's deep internal computational view
Yeah, this elegant, almost perfect innate system,
to Barthes and Leonard looking at language as this powerful social force out in the world,
shaping ideologies, reinforcing power.
and through all these intense debates that are still going on.
What becomes really clear, I think, is just how incredibly complex language is. It's this strange, fascinating paradox. It's both this deeply internal, biological thing inside each of us, this intricate computational system. And at the same time, it's this powerfully external social tool that literally builds our cultures, our relationships, our realities. And the more we learn, honestly, the more we realize what remains mysterious. Like, where did word meanings really come from evolutionarily? Or how do we explain the sheer free creative use of language, our ability to say and understand things never said before, which is something that fascinated even the early scientists like Galileo and Descartes.
Indeed. So maybe the next time you find yourself putting words together, crafting a sentence, or maybe you hear a phrase that just clicks or perhaps subtly shifts your perspective, ask yourself, is that moment more about the reflection of some innate, elegant computational design ticking away in your mind? Or is it more a product of the social currents, the cultural weight that language inevitably carries with it? Or perhaps, as we often find in these deep dives, is it actually a really beautiful, intricate, and maybe inseparable dance of both?